My name is Star. My topic was the long-term effects of the acute stress response on brain function and structure. A little bit of background on why I chose this topic. A friend and I went camping a couple years ago. We were chased by a bear back to our car. Her reaction was to freeze, while mine was to run away. And I was just interested to see what went on in our brains to make us react that way. So it's gonna what this slideshow is gonna be about. So a little bit about the acute stress response, basically the fight or flight. So stress is our body's immediate reaction to challenges. It triggers the fight or flight response, releasing hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. While this is helpful in immediate danger, our body often overreacts to non-threatening situations such as traffic or work pressure. So let's dive deeper into those effects. So we're just going to jump into the basics of what the fight or flight does. So it activates the sympathetic nervous system. Adrenaline raises your heart rate and boosts energy, while cortisol ensures glucose is readily available. However, chronic stress does suppress functions like digestion and immunity, causing long term health issues. On our next slide, it just more or less gives you an idea what your body does in order to get you ready for that survival mode. Your heart rate increases, your breathing gets deeper and faster, your increased blood flow to large muscle groups, so things like that. Interesting thing that I found while I was doing my research. So I guess when you think of the stress response, you know it harms your body, it harms your brain. But one thing I was interested to see is how much of an impact it has on reproductive health, not just for women, but for men as well. So stress impacts reproductive health significantly. For women, it can disrupt menstrual cycles, lower sexual desire, and worsen PMS symptoms. For men, stress affects testosterone production, sperm quality, and libido. Chronic stress even weakens the immune system, increasing vulnerability to infections and reproductive organs. So I can go on all night about how stress affects our brains, but three key areas that I want to touch base on are the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. So the hippocampus deals with our memory. This impacts our long-term memory formation. For the amygdala, it is our emotional regulation. So what stress does, it heightens anxiety and fear responses. Our prefrontal cortex is in charge of decision making and cognition, and what stress does, it affects our impulse control, our decision making, things like that. The thing I want to get into is just differentiating stress. So we have acute stress versus chronic stress. Acute stress arises from short term challenges and can be motivating. Chronic stress, however, stems from prolonged challenges and exposes the brain to high cortisol levels. This damages the hippocampus, the amygdala, and prefrontal cortex, altering structure and reducing resilience. Acute stress, it impacts our brain not as bad as chronic stress was, but we still do have impaired short memory, so it reduces our ability to store new information. Our attention is diverted to the stressor. We have difficulty concentrating on other tasks. Attention is focused mainly on that stressor. Our learning is also hindered. Stress can interfere with learning as the brain shifts focus from cognitive tasks to managing emotional responses. Attention is focused on emotion rather than the task at hand. Cortisol in the brain. Cortisol affects the brain areas involved in memory and emotion, like the hippocampus and the amygdala. Short-term cortisol release can make it harder to remember things or learn new information. Long-term cortisol can shrink parts of the brain, like the hippocampus, which makes it harder to learn and remember. So long-term stress makes it harder to think clearly and control emotions. So prolonged cortisol exposure worsens memory, shrinks the hippocampus, and amplifies anxiety by overacting the amygdala. Emotional regulation and decision making also suffer from long-term stress. All right, so we're just going to get to stress and brain plasticity. On the slide right here, kind of more or less gives you the brain changes in response to stress, the long-term effects of stress on the brain. Stress causes both adaptive and harmful brain changes. Initially, the brain adapts by creating or adjusting neural connections. However, chronic stress does damage these mechanisms, shrinking brain areas, impairing memory, and hindering decision making. And what it does to our brain, what it does to our bodies. Ongoing stress can also cause depression, anxiety, and PTSD, We know it damages parts of the brain that control emotions and memory. And if we're not in control of that, obviously there's going to be some bigger issues that occur because of that. So long-term stress can shrink the brain, making it harder to remember and learn. Chronic stress makes it harder to focus and think clearly. Stress also messes with the brain's ability to control emotions, which affects our thinking. And on this next slide, I just have a few facts I threw together. Memory can suffer, brain size can get smaller, strokes can strike, depression can occur, and these are all outcomes of long-term stress. Though thankfully there are strategies to combat stress. So a few ways we can do that is build social connections for emotional support, engage in regular exercise to relax your mind and body, prioritize sleep to restore brain function, explore relaxation techniques like yoga or mindfulness. Lastly, seek professional help if stress becomes overwhelming, because sometimes it is hard to do it on your own. So, in conclusion, while stress is a natural response, chronic exposure can harm our brain structure and functions. By adopting healthy habits and seeking early interventions, we can mitigate its long term effects. And if you guys want to read further into any of the articles, they're listed here. Thank you.